Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's very exciting Free Library of Philadelphia Foundation author event. It is wonderful to see you all here. There's much more to come in our spring season. Over the next few months, we will welcome to this stage scientists, historians, novelists, physicians, poets, and so many more. There is quite literally something for everyone, and I hope you will join us for more events. I also want to say just a few quick words about our organization in general. The Foundation works together with the Free Library to support programming and advance its mission of promoting literacy throughout the Philadelphia region. As a nonprofit, we are reliant upon your support to achieve these goals, so please do consider donating, which you can do quite easily through our website, freelibraryfoundation.org. Before we get to tonight's program, there are a few people and organizations I would like to thank. We are grateful first and foremost to this season's sponsor, Comcast, whose support allows us to keep these events as accessible and as affordable as possible. I would also like to thank Uncle Bobby's, our partner bookseller, and the Philadelphia Citizen, our new media partner. And finally, I'd like to thank the volunteers, a dedicated group of library patrons whose loyalty to this program is unmatched. We are so grateful for their support. You probably saw Tom, our stalwart volunteer, as you came into the auditorium this evening. Tonight, we welcome the writer and editor, Laurie Woolever, who has written about food and travel for the New York Times, GQ, Food and Wine, Lucky Peach, Descent, Roads and Kingdoms, and others, and has worked as an editor at Art Culinaire and Wine Spectator. She spent nearly a decade assisting Anthony Bourdain, with whom she co-authored Appetites, a cookbook, and World Travel, both New York Times bestsellers. She is also the New York Times bestselling author of Bourdain, the definitive oral biography. Tonight, she will speak with us about her incredible new memoir, Care and Feeding. She will be joined in conversation by Reem Kassis, who is a Palestinian writer and author of the best-selling and award-winning cookbooks The Palestinian Table in 2017 and The Arabesque Table in 2021, and the children's book We Are Palestinian in 2023. Her writing regularly appears in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Wall Street Journal, and The Washington Post, in addition to various news outlets, magazines, and academic journals. We are clearly in for a great discussion tonight. Please join me in welcoming Laurie Woolever and Reem Kassis.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for coming out. I'm going to start out with a short reading from the book. It's from the very first chapter of the book, and it's called Hayseed. "You look like a complete fucking hayseed," said the man conducting the job interview. "What's your story?" "My story is fuck you," I thought, then forced a polite little laugh and said, "I guess my story is that I just graduated from college and I want to be a writer." It was 1996. The Unabomber was in custody, the US economy was unstoppable, and all the girls were dancing to the AOL dial-up modem sound, wearing Wonder Bras and clear acetate pumps. I didn't think I was a hayseed until this man said it, but then it felt painfully true. Sitting in this man's office, I was unaware of the actual visible seeds in my hair, picked up earlier that day on the sprawling campus of Brooklyn Botanic Garden, BBG, where I was an intern. I wore an ill-fitting navy blue pantsuit, which constituted the entirety of my job interview wardrobe. Each morning, while I raked and mulched and mowed and weeded outdoors, the suit's synthetic fabric greedily absorbed all the complicated scents inside the BBG employee locker room. In college, I had tried to obscure my small-town roots with various gestures of world weariness, reading Anais Nin, smoking unfiltered cigarettes, getting diagnosed with mild clinical depression. But here in Midtown Manhattan, the man across the desk saw me for who I was, a shy, soft-bodied 22-year-old with a limited skill set. He may not have seen that I loved getting drunk and high and watching cable television, that I wanted a creatively fulfilling career and to be passionately loved, or at least lavishly validated, and had no idea what to do about it. After multiple fruitless interviews like this one, during which there were typing tests to fail and unanswerable questions about my strengths, weaknesses, and proficiency with Lotus 123 and Excel, I got offered a receptionist job at a financial recruiting firm, whatever that meant. They told me that the opportunity was contingent on my joining a gym, which I realized was code for losing weight, so I passed. I didn't yet understand why I had to be thinner, which is to say more attractive, to answer phones and open mail in an office full of men. I then had 2 promising interviews for a household cook job, first with an agency rep and then with the employer, who then hired someone with more experience. It was all quietly excruciating, especially having to go back to BBG each morning and weed whack along Flatbush Avenue, while people drove by, occasionally throwing full diapers or almost empty drink cans out their car windows. I was living in an illegal basement apartment in deep South Brooklyn, beneath my landlord's own sprawling Victorian house, which he shared with his wife, their 2 teenagers, and a golden retriever named Billy, who was friendly and sweet, but also a loud and unpredictable nighttime barker. The best thing about the apartment was the rent, which was $350 a month. The bathroom was spacious and well lit, with pleasing pink tiles, and a pink toilet and sink, which I liked very much. The worst thing about it was everything else, especially that it was presently my home, inhabited by me. The apartment was only marginally apartment-like, with weak fluorescent lighting mounted into a drop ceiling, held up by unpainted cinder block walls. The spiders were bold and numerous. The mice were timid, but made their numbers known by their copious leavings. It was, as befits a basement, dark and damp, even during the hottest and driest summer afternoons. On move-in day, my older sister drove me and my stuff down from our parents' house upstate, and within 10 minutes of our arrival, she had an allergy attack so intense that she could barely breathe. She left, wheezing heavily, while most of my stuff was still stacked in the driveway. Shortly after I moved in, there was a heavy rainstorm that sent rivulets of dirty water under the bolt-locked back door and into the nearby closet where I'd stacked my winter clothes and shoes and some books. Eventually, the puddles subsided, but never having experienced a flood, I didn't fully grasp that all of my shit had gotten wet and would soon be engulfed by mildew. There was no separate means of egress to the basement. To get in or out, I had to pass through the family's living room and front door. I tried to be discreet and polite with my comings and goings, even the one Sunday morning following an after-hours party at an East Village club called Save the Robots, where I discovered how much more vodka I could drink while on cocaine. My new jeans were wet with my own fresh pee, and I crept inside clutching a handbag into which I'd quietly vomited bile and peach-flavored Snapple on the train from Manhattan. The landlord himself was neither discreet nor polite. One weekday morning, as I exited up the stairs and through the living room to the front door on my way to work, he was right there, a few feet from the basement door, naked except for his flip-flops, fastening a collar and leash around Billy the dog's furry golden neck. I said nothing, didn't make eye contact, just kept going, down the steps and onto the sidewalk, muttering, oh my God," over and over, until I got to the subway platform. Again, this was 1996. I didn't have a cell phone, so it was just me, talking to myself about having seen my landlord's flaccid dick bobbling weakly in the morning light. I wondered if he'd had a robe close at hand as I waited for the train. I thought about his long balls and his droopy little boobs as I raked up cut grass. I thought again, just briefly, about his wrinkly dick during my lunch break when I took a stack of quarters to the employee payphone and called my answering machine to see if my recent manic resume faxing would yield any new interviews or offers. There were no messages, which made me feel like a bit of a failure. I I didn't yet understand that while I was lonely and broke, insecure and underemployed and without a clear vision of what success might look like, I was actually doing okay. I was alive and I had a bachelor's degree. I had seen an unwanted dick in an unexpected place, so now I had that story to tell. I had an apartment and a job, such as they were. I had my friend and classmate Alejandro, who lived in Manhattan and already knew from his adventures in the after-hours scene how to get and crucially share cocaine. And I already knew that when drug sick and still drunk on the train, it was best to vomit into your handbag if you had the option. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Laurie, for that very interesting excerpt from the book, which is actually the intro, the beginning of the book.
Yes.
Many of you, actually most of you don't know this, but Laurie has a very special place in my heart. She is the reason that Anthony Bourdain blurred my first cookbook, the reason that I probably have cookbooks that did well. But tonight, it's not about me. Tonight, it's about Laurie finally telling us her story after she has spent years and years and years shaping other people's. So let's just acknowledge something up front, which I think if you heard her excerpt now, you probably know that if you got this book expecting a tell-all about the time that she worked with Batali or Bourdain, this book is so much more than that. It is more deep, it is more raw, it is more personal. And I guess my question for you, Laurie, is, did you think about that when you started out writing? Like, were you concerned with what the reaction or the response would be to a book that is purely your story, or did you think, screw it, this is my story, it's my time to tell it, and that's the way it's going to be?
Well, I don't know that my thought was either one of those two necessarily, but what I knew is that I had a story to tell, or I had a lot of stories to tell. I had lived a lot of life in 25 years, from the end of college until the end of 2021, which is where the narrative leaves off. And some of my story intersected with some very big personalities, very famous people who had a lot of legibility in the world. So it would have been disingenuous to tell my story without also talking about those interactions and those experiences with those two sort of bookends of my career, Mario Batali and Anthony Bourdain. But I knew that some people would, I think once you play the hits, they want you to keep playing the hits, right? So I wrote a book, I created a book called Bourdain, the Definitive Oral Biography, that came out in 2021. And then there was someone else wrote a book about Tony, and then someone else did. And then there was a documentary that I participated in. And I think there is a deep appetite for stories and information and people trying to understand the life and death of Tony Bourdain. So I can understand that someone might come to this book wanting that, looking for that. And I'm not breaking any news, but I am telling the parts of my story that Tony intersected with, and the ways that he really helped me as a boss. And the same with Mario. It's not a tell-all about Mario, but it's about my few years working as his assistant and what I learned and what I saw.
So you mentioned Anthony Bourdain, and obviously you've been associated a lot with him throughout your career. But since his passing, you've also kind of come into your own, right? You wrote the biography, now you're writing your own book. And yet last week or 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the New York Times, and the headline was, Bourdain and Batali's assistant spill some secrets. I mean, as a woman, I personally was offended by this. Like, why do you have to associate and label women purely based on the men that they have worked with? Or I understand they, like you said, they are bookends, big figures, et cetera, but you are doing work in your own right. Mm-hmm. With that said, Anthony Bourdain was such a great and influential figure. We were just talking about that backstage. But for better or worse, you have been very tethered to him in the public eye.
Yeah.
Is that something that, you find frustrating, something that you've come to terms with, that you embrace? How do you feel about it?
I don't think it's frustrating. I think it's a very, someone like Tony casts a very long shadow, and I don't know that it's ever something that you can outrun or not necessarily even would want to. Yeah, I want to be known as a writer in my own right, and that's part of the reason why I wrote this book. But I wouldn't be the writer that I am without Tony, right? And I think there are probably some people here tonight that also worked with him and can probably say the same thing. Looking at one right now, that it's what a privilege and a pleasure to be associated with someone that did the kind of work that he did. We all, when he died, we all had to figure out what our individual paths were forward to keep making work that hopefully he would be proud of. So, yeah, I think it's. I could do something completely different. I could go, get a job at the post office, or I could go, I don't know, get an OnlyFans or something that would be, that would definitely sever that connection. But, I'm 50 years old. I'm not doing either of those things.
So it's a valuable connection as well. I mean,
yes, yeah, and it's the people that I've met, the experiences I've had, the opportunities, because of a name like Tony's that opens the door. It's it's a dance. I don't, there's a difference between making work that's inspired by the things that I learned from him, and telling my stories, and then sort of riding coattails. And I would like to avoid the second scenario.
Got it. So you mentioned that you wrote a lot of the books or a couple of books that came out with Tony, and we were just talking backstage about how much ghostwriting goes on in the food world in general. And the more senior you get, the more you have people who are co-authoring with you or even just writing the whole thing for you. So after so much time basically trying to really accurately channel people's voices onto paper, and I think you still sometimes do that now, what was the process like, or how did it feel to finally get your voice on the page? And I think the memoir has been described as hilarious and devastating. So is that you? Is that you on the page, or?
I would like to think I'm funny. I don't know if I'm devastating, but devastatingly funny. It feels great. I mean, it feels really great to be completely in charge of what the words are that go on the page, and to be not trying to help someone else tell their story, but to tell my own story. Yeah, like unequivocally amazing, great experience. Like,
so it was easy for you, like your voice just.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, easy. It's not easy to write a book, but yeah, it feels great. I would love to do it again, but unfortunately, I used up my whole life in this book, so I need to do some more stuff and write another one.
See more naked guys before you.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody show me their dick. Please don't.
No. While we're on the subject of personal stuff, let's flip it, and I'm going to ask you something a little more personal, because throughout the book you share very deeply intimate experiences that you've had. I mean, there was the Tokyo, I don't know if you guys have read the book or not yet, but there was the incident of the nipple biting in the Tokyo hotel. There was drinking gin from a dog bowl with Jack. There was the infidelities, abortion, substance abuse. That's very personal, very deep, very heavy. How did you decide, was the process like to think, I'm going to put this in there or I'm going to take it out? Were there things off limits? Obviously, you have a son, right, who might read these things. You have family, you have friends. What was it like navigating that?
Yeah, it's an essay question. I mean, there are a lot of things that I did, decisions I made, and ways that I behaved that I'm not proud of, that I shared in the book because I felt it was important to be honest about. I would not say this is an addiction memoir, but it kind of is, and I don't blame alcoholism for the decisions that I made, but it certainly didn't help to be. I definitely used alcohol as a sort of liquid courage, but speaking more broadly, I think it's just important to be really honest. And the books that I like to read, the memoirs in particular, are where the author is really sharing all the good and bad, and I always feel very comforted when I see that someone else has made a bad decision, and I'm interested in the consequences, and I'm interested in seeing them grow and learn and change to go from one place to another. So that's not really possible in this story, in my telling of it, if I don't say this is where I started. These are all the bad decisions I made along the way. It also, honestly, it makes for entertaining storytelling to say, like, I did this wild thing, and I don't feel great about it. It's a little embarrassing, but I did it, and let me see if I can make you laugh when I, tell this story. As far as the question about family members, yeah, there's some sensitive, embarrassing things that, frankly, if my mom were still around, I'm not sure I would have written this book, or I wouldn't have written the book in this way. My dad is still around, and he's sort of on the fence about whether or not he'll read it. He understands that there's stuff that's going to feel weird to know about me, and I also feel that way, but I didn't want to make that stop me. I didn't want to stop myself from writing these stories for fear of, embarrassing my dad. And as far as my son, he's 16 years old. He could not be less interested in anything I do that doesn't involve making him a burrito or transferring money onto his debit card. So he is, yeah, he may read it at some point, but not anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said about your dad is in and of itself inspiring, that you're not going to let that stop you from telling the story. So what have people's reactions been to the book has been out not that long yet, but are people telling you, like, this has helped me, or this is...
Yeah, I've gotten some really nice messages from people that I know and people that I don't know, saying, I've been clean and sober for X amount of time, and I could really relate to your story, or I worked in the industry, the food industry, for a long time, and a lot of these stories really resonate with me. Or I was a really big fan of Tony Bourdain, and I really love seeing these little aspects of his personality and your interaction. So I've gotten really nice feedback. As I was saying to you backstage, I learned from previous experiences, I'm not reading the comments. I'm not looking for myself on Reddit. I got rid of my Google alert. But to be honest, if anybody is talking about this book, if it's getting attention, if it's moving people to have a discussion with other people online, that's great. But I think I'm still a sensitive little baby and don't want people to say mean things about me. So if they're saying them, it's not my business, and I'm not going to go looking for it.
Good for you. I think that's a good strategy. You mentioned alcohol in the previous answer. You said it wasn't an excuse, but it kind of was also part of the reason you made some of these mistakes. And then you talk towards the end of your book about your cousin Brian's death from alcohol. Mm-hmm. Was that the wake-up call for you, or was it a series of things?
Yeah, no, it was not the wake-up call, but it was definitely a data point that I think probably led me in the direction of deciding to stop drinking. But it took another few years after that. I think 2 years after he died. Yeah, it was shocking to me. He was someone that I had sort of lost touch with, and he had really, had a very different kind of struggle with alcohol and a lot more consequences than I suffered. So it was another sort of turn in the road for me to see that someone I knew and loved could die from this disease.
Let's move it back a bit to work, less heavy personal stuff.
Let's tell some jokes.
But you talk in the context of work, you talk about your experiences with Batali. You mentioned the incident on the airplane, the incident where he called you and your friend his prostitutes. There were a few other ones, asking you to write fake blurbs. And this was, a different time from the one we're in right now. What was it like for you back then going through these experiences? Was it the kind of thing where you thought, okay, this is the industry, this is the way men are, and I'm just going to suck it up and keep going?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it was it was like the late 90s, early 2000s, and I do think that it wasn't that long ago, but I do think that it was, it was a few ticks back in the cultural clock and in terms of what was acceptable in the workplace, the way that, men and women relate to each other, in American kitchens. Or workplaces in general. And it was before a time where there was enough of a critical mass of women talking to each other, or people talking to each other about abusive behavior. It was just, the power dynamic was different. So it felt to me like, well, this is the environment that I have chosen to work in. This is who this guy is. And as I say in the book, there was a lot of positive that I got out of working for him. Connections to people in media, and what an education. And I was young and really liked drinking and partying, and felt like, how lucky am I to be in this job where, I get to go to Atlantic City, I get to go to Aspen, there's free-flowing wine and, lots of casual sex among, colleagues. I was aware that there were things that made me uncomfortable, but I was also aware that I was really having a good time. Not all the time, but especially at the beginning, I was really having a good time.
I guess you felt like it was part and parcel of the whole package.
Yeah, and that just didn't seem that there was certainly not any way to change, an individual boss's behavior, let alone change the culture of an industry.
In hindsight, I don't think they're calling us.
No.
Once he was accused of sexual assault, once he was disgraced, did you start to see those behaviors in a different light? Or did you wish that something had existed back then that would have allowed you to react differently? Or like you said, it was part of the package?
Yeah, it was, I don't know. I had a complicated set of reactions to knowing that there were investigations into not only Mario Batali, but other chefs, other leaders of industry across entertainment, business, you name it. There were men whose behavior was being called out and investigated, and there were consequences for them. So I was, there was some sense of relief. There was also a sense of like, oh no, I have friends who continued to work with him, who maybe went into business partnerships. Lots and lots of people whose jobs suddenly felt very precarious because of the natural fallout. People who worked on his television show. Right. That was part of it, and then a real question about whether or not I should speak to the press, whether or not I didn't really feel. And I write about this again, this sense of confusion. Am I a victim? Yeah, I got my ass grabbed once, but I didn't feel great. And I told him at the time to not do it, and then I went in the basement and cried. So it wasn't like I was like, this is fun. That wasn't the fun part. That was, but I also felt like, well, whatever. And again, that's, I think, just speaks to the tenor of the time. So I really didn't think of myself as a victim. Still don't. I really struggle with the language around that, because there are people who were truly hurt, allegedly, by him and by other men, and so it was a complicated set of reactions, I guess.
So, just to keep up with that, while we're on the subject of industry and kind of, I guess, the conversation that the Me Too movement broke open. Many of the structures that were in place that allowed these things to happen, whether it was, the restaurant hierarchies, this bad boy behavior, et cetera, a lot of those things I would say are probably still in place today. There have been some changes, but from where you're standing, do you think that there has been significant, substantial actual change, or is it very good PR strategies? But I'll also flip it to you and say, or do you think the pendulum has swung so far in the opposite direction that you now cannot joke, you cannot flirt with a colleague without worrying about being misunderstood or misconstrued?
Yeah. I've talked about this a lot in the last couple of weeks, talking about the book with various people, and I don't really know, in part because I've been working at home since 2009, so I'm kind of, I can't speak with any real authority about what is going on in the world of kitchens. All I can say is, the anecdotal conversations I've had. I did a series of interviews with women chefs for the James Beard Foundation a few years ago, and that was top of mind. What's the feeling in your kitchen now? What's the culture? How are you safeguarding? What's different since 2017? And I have heard, and I do believe that there are new structures in place in some cases. Places that never would have had HR before maybe have HR now, or they have a manager who's empowered to act like HR. And there are hotlines, and there are all these things. It's a great question about whether it is truly an effective change or whether it is lip service and PR. I don't really know the answer, but I would guess it's there's probably a spectrum of places that feel great and safe and fun to work in, and places that feel just like they did in 1999, and probably a lot in the middle.
And I don't want to belabor this, so we'll move on to something else. But just very quickly, I wanted to ask, because you mentioned a scene where Tony said to you, I think you guys were in LA, and he goes, Harvey Weinstein's an effing monster. So he kind of saw through him before everything broke through, and he might have seen it for other reasons, but you worked for two men that are so vastly different from each other. But you mentioned that specific incident. Like, did that in any way shape your view of either or both of them after the fact?
About my view of Tony or Harvey?
Batali's behavior, given that Tony had seen him for who he was even before the stories broke about him.
Yeah, it was such a strange coincidence, because that it was a year before the stories broke about Harvey. So the fact that we were staying in this hotel and there was this man who caught my attention just for being sort of unkind to the hotel employee, and then he turns around and it's Harvey Weinstein, and you just get kind of a chill. I think I wasn't in the entertainment industry, but I even heard. There were rumors and rumblings about Harvey for a long time. And there were probably, to kind of bring it around to the question, I think there were rumors and rumblings about a lot of the men who were investigated and had consequences during the Me Too movement. So, and that is true of Mario as well. There were things, I would hear things, and I saw things and experienced things, but I stopped working for him in 2002. But of course you hear things, and it's, hearing things, rumors, conjecture, hearsay, it's very different. What do you do with that?
That's true. Yeah. Well, like I said, I don't want to belabor that. So let's go back to your own experiences that got you here today. You read in this excerpt what it was like starting out and, what you wanted to accomplish, these ideas and aspirations that you had of what success would look like. How do you say now success looks like to you versus that little girl who was starting out?
Yeah, it's kind of, I have to say, it's almost come full circle, where at that time it was, I want to make enough money to pay my rent and be able to go out to dinner once in a while, and I wanted, success to me at that point would have been just getting out of that Brooklyn Botanic Garden job, which I did eventually, pretty quickly in the narrative of the book, and then I think throughout the course of this story that I tell about my work life, success, the mountaintop keeps moving. And I think that's a good and healthy and positive thing. At first it was, I'd like to be published as an author or published as a writer of any kind. This was in a moment where we didn't really have internet publishing so much, or it was very fledgling. And so I just thought I might never actually be published. And then once I did get published, it's like, well, I want a bigger byline. I want a bigger story. I want a more prestigious magazine. At some point I was chasing after the possibility of maybe getting published in the New Yorker, which I never did. I got frustrated and I let that go. And so, and then at some point it was, I would like to write my own book. And so I did that. And so what does success look like now? I would like to be able to pay off my substantial American Express debt. And I don't know, it seems pretty small, but also I can't do it right now. So I'd like the book to sell well. But also success is, I think I'm a good mom, and I do pay my rent, and I do, keep it together. I've been sober for, a little while, and that all feels like success, like a much smaller, but really, a solid success.
So you have a more nuanced understanding of it now versus...
I think so.
But one thing that comes across in your answer is, I guess, success is a moving target, right? It's not this fixed place. Did you experience that when you were working? Were there moments when you were at El Bulli or in Tokyo or Atlantic City, all those times where you felt on top of the world? Did you ever feel like, this is it, I've made it, I'm successful, only to feel like later it has changed? Or were you always thinking, no, there's more, this isn't it?
I'm a very glass 3/4 empty person. So I those moments of feeling like satisfaction and pleasure and contentment have always been a little bit fleeting for me. And I was saying backstage, the book is out, but part of me feels like, well, why don't I have a proposal for the next book? So and I think that's not such an uncommon characteristic among, ambitious people or neurotic people. So I'm trying to enjoy this moment. But yeah, I've
The pressure is real.
yeah, yeah.
Here's a question that I don't know if there are people in the audience who are in the food world. They might find it useful, but today, if you look at it, it's moving at an alarming pace, right? From how content is consumed to who is producing this content, to who has the right to produce it, to all these things. And you were also working in the food world at a time when it was changing quickly, differently, right? Like you were going from glossy food magazines to blogs, from TV chefs to social media influencers. How was it? Was it easy to kind of adapt with the times, or did it always feel like you were playing catch up? And what would you say to people navigating the world now that's moving even faster, I'd argue, than it was back then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, I don't know if I felt that I was playing catch up. I mean, at some point, I just took myself out of the game. When I was an editor at Wine Spectator for a couple of years, and then the opportunity came up to work for Tony, and I struggled with it a little bit, the idea of, well, I've been trying to be an editor for a long time, and I'm just going to walk away and be an assistant again. But I did, and I don't regret it. But it is when I was dying to be in magazines and dying to have that kind of life, it's still, there was a path. There were a lot of magazines that had big staffs, and they paid full-time salaries, and it meant something. It still means something, but it's very difficult to make a living at these jobs. And freelancing, all of the everything has contracted financially. So, and that's the part where I do feel a little bit like Tony Soprano, like, oh, I came in at the end, I missed all the good stuff. By the time they let me in the door, it was like, party's over. So. Yeah, and I don't know what I would say to someone now who wants to get into the food writing game. I would say don't limit yourself to food writing. Be a generalist writer. Try and learn as much as you can about as many things as you can, because there just isn't really enough work, in my estimation. I would love to be proven wrong, but my sense is that it's things keep contracting. Food 52 just laid off 40% of their staff. I mean, it's really. It's not
promising.
It's not
and
promising.
With the advent of AI, I think it's.
But we do still love reading, and somebody's got to write all this stuff. And I think we're quickly realizing that AI is not where it's at in terms of reading actual things that you want, a person would want to read, right? So.
Well, I mean, it's like your book. There's a person behind it. You don't have a person. AI is writing it. And that.
So I don't know. I wish I had a more uplifting answer. But there's always going to be an opportunity to write, and whether or not you can make money at it is, it's a challenge.
Yeah, there's not much money in it. No. If you could go back and sit down for a meal with younger you, who was just starting out, what would you eat, and what would you tell that little girl?
Oh, God.
Sorry, not to make it too, but.
What would I eat? I don't know. I mean, probably like Lucky Charms, which I specifically called out in my book as the food that I most like to eat. Mm-hmm. You can eat it when you're drunk. You can eat it when you're sober. You can, it's gluten-free if that's your thing.
Is it?
It is.
Oh, I didn't
Lucky
know
Charms, yeah.
Okay.
It's not a problem for me, but what would I say to her? God, I don't know. I mean,
sounds like therapy now, not like an
well,
interview,
it's tempting to be like, quit drinking, or don't sleep with that guy, but then I wouldn't have these stories. So
Sure.
I don't think I would. And I'm sure if older me came to younger me would be like, shut the fuck up, get away from me. Who are you? You're jealous, whatever. I was not interested in taking advice from people, especially when they were trying to be helpful. Like the pastry chef at Babbo was this lovely woman, Gina De Palma, who has since passed, and she one time said to me, I think I wrote this in the book, she came to me and said, you're kind of becoming a booze hound. I was bragging about some night out, and she was like, oh, you take it easy, and I just thought, well, she's just jealous because I'm having a good time and she's not, which is very childish. So I don't know that I wouldn't have taken advice if it was given to me.
That's interesting, actually. In a similar vein, and I think I heard you say this on one of your podcasts, and I think maybe the audience might find it interesting. Tony's death was tragic, and it was sudden. But if you could go back and have one final meal with him, what would that one be?
Someone asked me recently, and I said this before, and I'll say it again. Like, I would have a pack of saltine crackers to be able to, just to hang out with him and be able to spend more time with him. But whatever he wanted to eat, I guess.
It was the company, not the food.
Yeah.
So apparently we only have 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask you one final question. The book, as you've seen, I guess, from this discussion, if you've read it, it's intensely personal, but it's also reflective of, I guess, an industry-wide reckoning, if you will. It's also a book of lessons and advice and so much more than just a memoir. But what do you hope readers, specifically I would say maybe readers who are in this world right now, what do you hope they take away from it?
Readers,
a big question,
readers who are in the world in the culinary world.
Yeah, because I mean that's the world I guess that you came from. But in general, any reader who's reading, is there
I
something?
don't know. I would hope that there's, even though it's my specific story with a lot of details that are kind of specific to my life, I would hope that people find something that they can relate to that reflects their own experience, their own questions, or their own sense of trying to figure things out, or something that makes them laugh. If somebody comes to the book, I think this is sort of echoing what we said at the beginning. If somebody comes to the book because they're interested in Tony Bourdain or Mario Batali or whatever, that's great. But I hope that they come away with some sense of having read a story about a person who is not famous and find that maybe as interesting as the big guys.
I did. I found it very interesting.
Well,
I think that's all the time we have for my questions, but that means it's open for you guys. There are 2 people who are walking on either side of the room. The only thing I'm going to say is we'll call on you, but do not speak until you get the microphone, because otherwise we can't hear you. So shall we start with this gentleman right here?
Good evening.
Hi.
How prominent was food and beverage for you growing up? What kind of experiences, or did that not come until later in your life?
Yeah, let me think about how to answer this. My parents liked food and cooking, but we weren't precious about it at all. It was very much like, my mother worked full time, put dinner on the table every night. I don't know that she thought it was really fun to cook, but she did it. And it was, very kind of basic American food that we would eat. But the thing that was sort of special in our family was my dad was a big outdoorsman, hunter, fisherman. And so there was a lot of pride in bringing home, deer sausage, or one of the things that my mother really loved to make was called poor man's lobster, or poor man's shrimp, and it was lake perch that was poached and either served hot, and it was poor man's lobster, or cold for poor man's shrimp, and either with butter or cocktail sauce. So, those kinds of things that we would sort of have fun on the weekends with food, make soft pretzels or bake cookies, but we were not foodies in any way. And I read about that a little in the book, that Julia Child didn't really mean anything to me because when I was a young culinary student, because growing up it was like, that's too fancy. We are like ragu sauce from the jar and hamburger helper kind of family. So that's the food background I came from.
Hi there. I'm very much enjoying the book. I'm about 80% of the way through. And in parts of the book, there are moments where you seem really, like after you stop working for Mario, you seem really concerned about like what he's going to think about a particular thing that you're writing, or you're trying to avoid writing stuff that he's going to see. And I'm wondering whether you're still in touch with him, whether he's read this book, whether you've had any feedback about it, because the way that you do write about him is very raw, and I'm just kind of curious what your relationship with is like with him now.
Yeah, that's a good point. That I was throughout the book, I really talk about being afraid of him, and not wanting to get on the wrong side of him because he had so much power and he was not afraid to blackball a person. And were it not for the 2017 Me Too movement, I certainly would not have written about him in this way if he still had the kind of power and cultural cachet that he has. I wouldn't have felt safe writing this book. So I don't know. I haven't been in touch with him since then. I have no idea if he's read it. I don't know. I would like to think that I was fair. I was fair and I was honest, and I think some of the stuff maybe is not. I wouldn't love to see this stuff written about me, but it is true, and I think I made a big effort to be balanced with talking about the benefits and the fact that he could be really fun, charismatic, smart, et cetera, but also he did some pretty terrible things. So.
More questions. I mean, I have a lot more questions, but I think your questions are more interesting than mine. So.
Authors have to make a lot of decisions in writing a book. And did you think about including recipes or not? Were there other decisions you had to make in forming this book?
Yeah, I was pretty set from the beginning that I didn't want to include recipes because I felt that the material stood on its own without having to sort of do a value add of recipes. And fortunately, my publisher and my editor felt the same way. Not that there's anything wrong with the memoir with recipes, but I just felt like it wasn't something I wanted to do. And yeah, I definitely had to make decisions about what to leave in, what to take out. There was a point where my editor said, there's too much vomiting in this book. And there's still a lot of vomiting in the book. So imagine how much there was before she took her knife to it. And in some cases, there are incidents that seem like they happen once, but they happen a number of times. So it's a matter of, is this compelling to the reader? Is this new information? Does it keep the narrative moving, or are we getting stuck in a loop? And of course, being a drunk is very boring and repetitive, and you do the same things over and over again. But I had to sort of understand that there's a way to illustrate that without taking the reader through every single time of being drunk sick. So, thank you for the question.
Can you hear me? There we go. So how does a hayseed eating ragu out of a jar wind up in this high-level culinary world? What was the transition? Did you have culinary training, formal training? Julia Child wasn't important to you. So what was the bridge?
Yeah, it was, you got to read the book. But it was, it was a long process, starting with working as a private cook for a family, and then that spurred me to want to go to culinary school so I could actually have the skills. I did a very quick 6 months at the French Culinary Institute in New York, and then pretty much right away started working with Mario Batali, and that was its own incredible education in cooking, restaurants, food, real estate, travel, media, all these different things. And I became a voracious reader of cookbooks and food memoirs and travel writing, and the more I wrote, the more I read, and just kind of just kept at it. A lot of reps, as they say, and I did a lot of private cooking and catering. So just trying to be a sponge and soaking up all of the everything that I could to become what you see here.
There's a question in the back.
Thank you. Are there any specific food memoirs or writers you took inspiration from in writing this book?
Gotta be honest. I haven't read a food memoir in a long time. Well, I'll back up a little bit. Gabrielle Hamilton's Blood, Bones, and Butter, I think, is the quintessential, incredible food memoir. She's such a good writer. She happens to have an MFA in creative writing, and also is, a successful chef and restaurateur, and her book is just stunning. And I think that's pretty universally acknowledged that that's really good. Obviously, Kitchen Confidential was the other sort of big touchstone. I really loved a friend's father years and years ago said you should read George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London, and that's I can't recommend that highly enough. I really enjoyed reading Ruth Reichel's books when they came out, MFK Fisher. Elena Reagan wrote a book called Burn the Place that came out maybe 5 years ago, and I think she's written a follow-up that I haven't had the chance to read yet. But there are a lot of them out there, and I'm sure there are some that I'm forgetting, but those are the ones that are top of mind.
There's one over there.
Hi, and thank you. What's your relationship with food today? Do you enjoy cooking? Do you enjoy entertaining? Do you never want to go into a kitchen again?
I really do enjoy cooking at home. Primarily, it's just for me and my son, or me and my son and my boyfriend, or me and my boyfriend. Some like small group of people, 1 to 2 to 3 people is kind of my day to day. And it's not super fancy, but I do enjoy reading cookbooks and sometimes getting inspiration from them. I don't really entertain. Once I quit drinking, I sort of lost that desire to have people over, and I haven't really quite figured out how to throw a great dinner party that doesn't feel, I don't know, awkward somehow. But I moved into an apartment that's got a strange shape, so I don't know. I've got a lot of excuses, but I used to really enjoy dinner parties, and I haven't ever really picked it back up. COVID also, blame COVID. But I don't mind. This summer, actually, I worked as a catering cook for one party. Of my friend needed help, and I loved it. And you kind of have a muscle memory if you've done it enough. And I was exhausted. I think it was like a 5-hour cocktail party. It wasn't like a huge, heavy lift, but I was happy to know that I could still do it, that I knew how to move around, how to, behave professionally, and how to work fast and get the food out. So I think I am definitely aged out of that as a actual career choice, but it's nice to know that, I was happy to know that I could still do it.
Hi. So what I'm gathering is that you started personal chefing before you really had culinary experience?
That is true.
That was great. That was courageous. How did that go for you?
Yeah, so I think it's the second chapter in the book.
It's in the book.
Where it was this very specific instance where this family just wanted someone to cook fat-free food. This is, the 90s. Nobody cared about, they didn't care about things tasting good. They just wanted fat-free food. And in fact, they didn't want someone who was trained, because I think it was, I think it's just hard to make food that tastes good with no fat in it. So they had hired a real chef, a trained chef, and they fired her not too long after, because she just kind of couldn't compute the idea of not putting butter in the food. So yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, but they wanted steamed vegetables and spaghetti and broiled chicken breasts. So it was a good fit for a couple of years.
And whipped cream.
And fat-free whipped cream. Yeah, that's the whole story in the book. So gotta read the book.
Do I see any more questions? We still have, I think, time for one more, probably. Last chance.
Crickets.
Don't be shy. Go for it. Oh, and there's one more over there. Maybe we can squeeze it in. Let's see.
So you talked about success as a moving vehicle, if you will, but and you've worked behind the scenes for these big-time people. During your career at that time, was there a time where you felt kind of on top of the world, where it was the best experience you had, and it was just a great thing?
I think, moments where I was traveling, where I got the opportunity to travel with Tony Bourdain and their crew. I wasn't personally achieving anything. I was kind of just along for the ride, but to have your boss invite you along to some incredible place in the world. We went to Tokyo and Sri Lanka and Hong Kong, and to just be allowed to have the privilege to go along to those places and to be, put up in luxury and to have the freedom to go and write magazine articles about those places. Those were real high points. I felt really good about that, and I wish I wish I was still doing it. But yeah, those were hard to beat. Hi.
Hi. Did you go anywhere fun today to eat in our fair city?
Yes. This was, it was called Dan Rittenhouse. I'm close to the hotel where I'm staying, and came up on the Google. I didn't do a lot of deep research. I get very lazy. I like to take advantage of a hotel and, stay in the bed as long as possible. So this was like a 10-minute walk from the hotel, and it was great. We had Dan noodles and pea shoots and something else that I'm forgetting. What was the other thing? He can't remember either. Anyway, delicious food and lovely warm service and yeah. So, and maybe something tomorrow for breakfast before I get back on the train. Oh, and we're going to Continental Midtown tonight. I almost forgot. Yeah. Thank you much, everyone.
Thank you.